Hi, and welcome to Progressive Podcast Australia. I'm Nick, and today on the show, we're discussing the book Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. And I am joined by the friend who recommended that book to me. So thanks for the recommendation, and thanks for coming on the show, Dylan.
Oh, no worries, Nick. Thanks for having me.
And Dylan has been on the show discussing a range of issues, Palestine, animal liberation, and those kind of issues. And I think on this podcast, we've kind of had almost like two different sort of trains of thought going down different directions. We've got our usual stuff of talk about social justice issues and political issues and a bit of pop culture in there. And then on the other side, we've had me whinging about having too many emails. And I guess this goes into that second category. It won't be just be talking about email, but talking a bit about sort of getting things done, and I guess the idea of feeling like you've got an endless to-do list, you never get to the bottom of it. And this book, which gives some what I found useful hints for dealing with that kind of issue. And we are doing this show in two formats. So we're doing it both in podcast form as usual. We're also doing it in video form in YouTube. So if anyone is listening to the podcast, feel free to check us out and watch the YouTube if you like. But yeah, for the podcast audience, we opened up with a clip from The Office, and it was all about, I guess, the perception of getting things done. So one of the characters, Daryl, was saying he brushed his teeth in the shower, he saved 90 seconds, so now he's got all this extra time, he can do extra things. So it is sort of a literal interpretation of the first part of the book title of getting things done, like getting more things done. And I know that is something which kind of originally, in a way, put me off the book when you recommended it. Because I was like, no, I don't want to get more things done. I, in a way, want to get less things done. It's more like feeling like I am already doing too much and kind of dealing with that. So I thought, I guess that is sort of two different places to go. I think the fact that it was on The Office shows how like this is a popular book. It's not this obscure book that we're sort of shedding light on. It's a very popular book. There were a lot of product placements in The Office though. So if it was a product placement, it's weird they kind of misrepresented. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just a genuine story they wanted to include. I'm not sure. But the other side of it is, I guess, maybe a good place to start when we're talking about the book is what the book is actually about, because that doesn't necessarily give the closest thing. So do you want to talk about maybe that that misperception around what the book is about?
Yeah, I came across Getting Things Done about 3 years ago. I'm currently in the UK in an organization called Animal Think Tank, and one of the things I was looking at was the management system that we would use, and something they mentioned was one of the systems that I was looking at was this thing called Getting Things Done. And I looked at it, and on the surface, it seemed very much like many of the sort of productivity tools that I'd come across in the past. There's a million tools out there that promise that, okay, if you implement this tool, this piece of software, this little technique, that will just transform your productivity and you'll be able to get more things done. You'll be able to be relaxed. You'll be able to do all of the projects and all of the priorities that you want to get done. And that's what GTD, Getting Things Done, appeared to be on the surface. But for some reason, I was piqued. There was something that called me to it. And I had a feeling that this book would change my life. And then I started reading the first few pages, and immediately I got a sense of, okay, this thing is different. I noticed that the writing was coming from a place of almost serenity and equanimity. And the book outlined that this is a method that's not actually intended to help you to get lots of things done, but it's about getting you to a place where you're essentially present with the current moment. You're getting to a place where you're so clear on what is on your plate right now that you're able to then you're able to make a conscious choice that the thing you're doing in the moment right now is the most important thing to be doing. And it allows you to to be, it allows you to live like in the actual moment. And that I found really special. It was almost like it was coming from a place of a higher purpose, a higher calling, something that was more spiritual almost. And I was really, really excited by that prospect. I think one of the interesting things that getting things done gets you to do is it gets you to contend with the fact that your time, your attention is finite, right? Whereas so many other tools that I've come across make a false promise that you will get through your to-do list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting things done essentially gets clear with you. You're never going to get through your to-do list. But what you can do is you can have a to-do list that is complete, that is current, that leaves you in a state of presence such that you don't have lots of things nagging at your mind all of the time. And then you can make a conscious choice of what is it that I want to be focusing on right now. And it allows you to get a sense of, am I appropriately engaging with the things in my life that I care about, whether that be my work projects, whether that be my relationships, whether that be looking after my dog, whether that be buying a gift for my mom, whether that be planning my next holiday. All of these things kind of get laid out, and then you can have a sense of, okay, I'm doing okay at this. And that's I think the beauty of GTD. It allows you to just be and have a mind that is responsive.
Absolutely. And like what kind of stood out to me from the book was that sort of focus on mindfulness, even though the word, I believe, may not appear in the book, or if it does, maybe once or twice maximum, but it's not a big focus. But yeah, it is about like being present in the thing you're doing. And just an analogy I sort of came, it's not like from the book, but I feel is consistent with the spirit of the book. It's not saying like, don't take a walk along the beach and instead make sure you're productively getting through your emails. It's that you're on top of your inbox enough so that you can walk along the beach without worrying about your emails. For example, I feel that is more what I've got out of the book, of not necessarily going, oh, I'm on top of everything, but more like, and this is from the book too, but feeling okay with what you're not doing. So I do have these things to do, but they don't have to be done right away. And I've got them captured in one place and I'm kind of okay with that. So yeah, as you say, it's sort of, it's not the false promise of you'll have an empty list. It's about having a list that's managed and checked in, and it does allow you to kind of focus on what you're doing as well.
Exactly. It's really allows you to, I think when you can get this method down, and practice it with a level of consistency, it allows you to ultimately live a fuller life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes when I go home, I don't want to work on my projects. I want to just sit down and have a meal. I want to chat to my housemate. And having a getting things done system that is current allows me to just be fully in those moments without having things nagging on my mind saying, oh, maybe I should be doing this other thing instead. Oh, maybe I need to be sorting out my finances. I kind of know those things are in hand, and I will get to them in time when the right time comes around.
Yeah, absolutely. And you elaborate on this a little bit in terms of your work with Animal Think Tank, but would you like to talk a little about what drew you to this book in terms of those issues, whether they were related to like activism stuff or just life stuff generally? What sort of made it very important to get on top of these issues? I think they are something that impacts everyone. I did notice that he mentioned that on an earlier edition of the book, he was wearing like a suit and it was kind of pitched at corporate executives, but now, like, yeah, particularly like email and stuff like that, like it's really, I think, quite applicable to everyone. The more recent edition, which you recommended to me, is sort of less geared towards like corporate executives specifically, and more just towards a general audience as well. But yeah, what made this important or needed in your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Initially, what drew me to getting things done was very much, I came across it in the course of my work with Animal Think Tank, but it was a desire to get more clarity on my life that really drew me into it. And I think I got very immersed in it. And I became quite nerdy about it for quite some time. And I'd evangelize, and I helped my girlfriend at the time put together her own system, and I'd sell it to everyone at Animal Think Tank. Like, you need to do this. And then, as you know, I saw those benefits, the benefit of a clearer mind, of being clear on what are the things I care about. I then came across kind of another school of thought, which is thinking about how, what we need to do to have agile, adaptive organizations that can solve the most complex problems in this world. We at Animal Think Tank, so we're building a social movement for animal freedom in the UK. And that's a complex task that's going to take a while, right? One of the things we're doing to help us accomplish that is we're incorporating a self-organizing way of working, in that we have, it's not no hierarchy. It's rather a system where we have dynamic hierarchies, where essentially people are entrusted with roles and trusted to lead those roles in a way that feels true to their own kind of creative drive. That is a very vague summary of a system called Holacracy, which we are using. In order to make Holacracy work, everyone needs to have a trusted personal system for organizing their stuff, for organizing their work. Why? We don't have managers in Holacracy. In a conventional organization, essentially, managers will make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. And that's a pretty big positive of the conventional management hierarchy. But it comes with downsides as well. It comes with overburdened managers. It comes with people not feeling particularly empowered necessarily. And it comes with organizations. It often, but not always, results in organizations that aren't as adaptive as they could be. So we're implementing self-organizing. And in this system, we don't have managers in conventional sense. Every role has management functions, but essentially everyone needs to be able to trust each other when they're sending information, when they're making a request to take on a project, when they're expecting something from someone. So let me break this down into a very concrete scenario. Let's say I get an email that tells me about an opportunity happening somewhere in the world, right? Okay, there's this group running an action in 3 weeks' time. There may be a load that we can learn from it. It's not necessarily relevant to one of my roles, but I think there's somebody else who could really benefit from it. So I will then forward that email over to that other person who I think would benefit from it. And now in a situation where people don't have a trusted system for organizing their stuff, I don't necessarily know if that email is going to be received. Whereas in a system where everybody has a getting things done system, which everybody does at Animal Think Tank, I know that email is going to be looked at and processed and engaged with appropriately. There'll be a person who they'll ask themselves, is this relevant to my role? They'll probably say yes. Okay, they'll look at it, and then they'll turn it into, they might turn it into a next action. So there might be just something they need to do with it that's very concrete and simple, or it might inspire a slightly bigger idea that takes more than one step. They might think, oh, there's an outcome here that I need to achieve. They might think, oh, this informs me about a particular area of knowledge that I need to learn about. So they might create a project around that of like, you know, I've learned about this thing, and then they can break that down into what actions do I need to do to learn about this thing. So if you imagine that scenario kind of playing out across an organization, with all the sorts of requests and communications that happen in an organization, it means that people are able to, it means that information flows, and the organization is able to jump on lots of opportunities. And information flow is, you know, one of the prime problems of, or one of the prime challenges of running an organization. So, you know, especially I think, you know, in the social justice world, in the world of trying to change things, I've noticed an undercurrent of rebelliousness towards, you know, concepts like management, concepts like organization, and there's a, you know, there can be sometimes a trend towards, oh, can we just be more free flowing? Can we be more collaborative and organic about things? And there's absolutely a place for that. But I think there are also really powerful things we can harness from more kind of structured methodologies, like getting things done, that can really empower us towards, not even empower, but supercharge us to be more capable of tackling these kinds of problems that we're trying to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I can definitely, I guess, speak to that as more like an individual. I'm within organizations too, but just as an individual, when you're emailing people who might not have those systems in place, I think that if all people get out of this discussion or from reading the book is having, you know, one next action and two waiting for as files in your email, that would be a super useful step. Because I know myself, since I've started implementing the system, if I send an email about something, for example, I might email about an issue with my dog at the vet, for example, like an important thing, and I'm going to send that off. Yeah, hopefully the vet will get back to me, but there is obviously a chance that, you know, things fall through, people don't get back to you, that kind of thing. And rather than just sending that and kind of trying to keep that in my mind, and where it might sort of be subconsciously weighing on me, taking away space from other things, doing this discussion right now, whatever it may be, I can just put that in my waiting for folder, and that's something I'm going to check in each week. And then if they haven't replied, I know when the email was sent, and I can easily just follow up from there. So yeah, I think with this methodology, obviously, you know, as with anything, like take what you like and leave what you don't. But I think there's definitely some really useful steps in there. And definitely, I have been a bit like you in the evangelizing about the book. I've been talking about it with a lot of people. But I think because so many people are dealing with these issues to different degrees. And I think I've had this for, this issue, and we've been talking about it on the show here and there for the last few years, but of having this feeling. And I think it is so common. And yeah, there's a particular song actually, which has sort of been one of my most played songs over the last year or two. And I was like, why is that? So the song is Confidence by Oscar Scheller and Ashnikko. I quite like Ashnikko. I'm not too familiar with Oscar Scheller, but and I was like, why am I connecting with this song so much? And then I was thinking there's a particular lyric which is I'm overloaded. And I think that is sort of just such a common feeling, and something I've been feeling for the last few years. And I also, the last few years, I've been also really relating to, did you see the series Mr. Robot at all?
No, I haven't.
No? Okay. It's a really good series about hacking and stuff like that. But there's a character in there called White Rose, and they're really obsessed with time. There's like clocks everywhere, and they're constantly, and kind of that feeling of like the day's coming to an end, and that struggle of like, do I stay up late to get things done? And then I'm kind of too worked up and I can't sleep, or do I just go to bed with all this stuff and I'm worried about the stuff, and constantly like the day's running out, time's running out. And so again, I found it really, really useful in that respect. And I think part of it has been the very practical things from the book, and we'll definitely get into some of those. Again, things like email folders, those kind of things. I also think something I've said on the show before, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I often, when I think about things like maybe a meditation retreat or maybe an ayahuasca ceremony or whatever it may be, I haven't gone down either of those roads. But when people do those things, like the practice, whatever it is, may have some impact on itself, but it's also about like taking time away to actually deal with a particular issue that you're dealing with. And so, yeah, I don't think I've ever read a self-help book before this one, but actually, as much as there are practical steps, it was a matter of I've got this issue I've been dealing with for years, and actually taking that time to like read the book and kind of think about those issues is kind of important. Important to take that time. Do you have any thoughts on that around this, the sort of part of it is actually just taking the time to think about these things? So often we're so busy getting things done, we don't think about how we're doing things and those kind of issues.
Absolutely. I was actually going to say, so in Animal Think Tank, I've had the experience now of onboarding about 15, 16 people into the organization. And I've noticed that the people who end up being best organized are basically the people who just go away and read the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to setting up a getting things done system, there is an article out there that's a pretty good blog post that essentially summarizes the methodology and tells you everything you need to know to set up a system. But I think I got a tremendous amount of benefit from taking the time to read the book, and then I actually set aside about a day, I think, to set up my system.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might sound like quite a lot of time to a lot of people, but the time you will save will be orders of magnitude more than that. I don't know if that's been your experience, but
yeah, absolutely. I took 2 days. So yeah, and
right.
Even that, I didn't touch my computer. So had I gone through computer file stuff, could have even been, it does sound like a lot of time, 2 days, but 2 days. And that is something that the author recommends in terms of like going through like everything. And I did this, went through everything in my house, car, any like cupboards or anything like that. And basically just seeing, and I had to-do lists in drawers around the place. And so they all go into your in tray. Because we do actually have the YouTube thing here, or we've got the video going, I have for the first time we'll see if we can see that, an in tray with my next actions. I'm not waiting for anything at the moment, but next actions are waiting for. So yeah, anything that was like maybe old to-do list would go in the next actions thing, and then you'd kind of put them onto your list. And yeah, if like basically things can go physically in your in tray. Obviously, if it's like sell piano or something like that, you could just have a post-it and put it in there rather than putting the piano in your in tray, that kind of thing. But I did mention this to a friend when I was being evangelical about it myself, and he was like, "No, like that's too much, like the whole 2-day thing." And it's like, well, that's fine, but you can still implement the other things if that doesn't appeal to you. But I've found it useful. I did it on Boxing Day, so 26th and 27th of December, a time we wouldn't be doing much. I'm probably, unlike a lot of progressives, I think I'm a fan of cricket. So the Boxing Day test match was on, so I was pretty relaxed, got the cricket on in the background, and just took 2 days. And my partner, Katie, was really into it. She's really into this stuff, was very happy to help me out with it. And yeah, it wasn't a bad 2 days, and I'm going to do the same again next year on Boxing Day and kind of have a reminder to do that. So yeah, I actually found it really useful. Like I had a painting from my auntie that was just sitting, and it kind of fallen off the wall in a previous place. And I then had a next action of getting that framed, and just little things like that, just little things that might have been weighing on you somewhere along the way of like getting everything sorted. Yeah.
Does Katie have her own system now as well?
Well, she doesn't actually have the getting things done methodology, and I don't think she's necessarily implemented anything from it, but she was already super on top of things, always has a clean inbox and everything like that. So whatever she's doing, it's not really based on a particular system, but it's working. It was always me who had the 1,000 unread emails and that kind of thing. So yeah, I needed it more than her.
That reminds me of a really useful thing David Allen says in the book, which is a great system is a system that works for you.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, right, this is a methodology that fundamentally it's a set of principles that you apply, and you can apply it across any, you can do it digitally, you can do it paper-based, you can have physical in trays like what you have. But ultimately there are different elements, and you can apply these different principles to fill gaps in your kind of your own system. Because I imagine there'll be a few people who listen to this who kind of hear it and they'll be thinking, you know what, but I'm doing okay. And you well might be. And there are potentially things that could make your life, even better. And like, who wants to turn that down? There was something else that I wanted to say. I've lost it. Let's keep going.
It might come back to you, but again, because we got the video, I did want to mention that, you recommended the book to me, and it did actually, I was actually looking this up before we recorded. So you recommended the book to me. I think I found this in my somewhere. So you recommended it to me in January 2021. I don't think I necessarily started it like that month, but I think I did start it pretty soon after. And then I finished December 2022. So it did take me nearly 2 years to listen to the book. I was thinking I maybe need another book to explain how to read Getting Things Done, maybe, and that might have helped me out. But it did take quite a long time. And I did read or listen to the audiobook, and when you recommended it, it doesn't have the greatest reviews, to be honest, the audiobook specifically. But none of them put me off reading it or listening to it, because it was like, well, none of the things were things that bothered me. So the first one was like, he reads it himself, which I think is always good, but he's not a voice actor or anything like that. I'm like, well, that's fine. I'm not reading it for entertainment. That's fine. The other common critique was that, it's hard to listen to an audiobook because like you need to be taking notes and that kind of thing. So I feel like quite consistent with Getting Things Done. I've actually got, I was taking notes very much like that. So I think about like 15 or so of those, but taking notes like that. So I've got about 15 of those. And so even though I was reading the audiobook and you can't like highlight and that kind of thing, I still found it really useful of just kind of scribbling the notes to myself. And then when I implemented the methodology on that time around Boxing Day, it was all kind of, I could just have another quick read through that and before doing this discussion as well. So I found the audiobook really useful, even though not everyone agreed. I think also some people like, it's not that updated for social media and that kind of stuff, but I feel like the principles kind of really, the technology doesn't really matter that much. It's more about like obligations and that kind of thing, whether that is putting in a next action around a Twitter post or, whatever, sending a physical letter. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. So again, those critiques are out there, but I definitely got a lot out of the audiobook specifically. So yeah.
Yeah, no, the fundamentals remain the same regardless of kind of technological development. In the end, we have a whole bunch of things getting thrown at us, and we need to deal with those things. I think it's really great that you mentioned the audiobook because earlier I recommended reading the book, and I know that may not always be the thing that is most accessible to a person. So there are a couple of other resources that you can look at. David Allen has some really great TEDx talks on YouTube, which I think the way he talks about GTD is very inspiring, and he really comes across as someone who's caring, and someone who has your best interests in mind, which I really love about the way he talks. There's also a podcast, Getting Things Done podcast, which can be a really great way to immerse yourself in the methodology. And then lastly, there's also on the Getting Things Done website, you mentioned that we've talked about there are different ways to implement GTD. So there are actually resource guides online that kind of show you how to implement GTD on various different softwares, on Paper System, which are very comprehensive as well. So to any viewers listening, any listeners listening who are interested in creating their own system, I highly recommend looking at those. And really, immersion, I think is the key here. I think doing that over 2 years probably was really beneficial to you because you essentially would have spent good chunks of time over 2 years
Mm.
thinking about GTD and kind of really embedding it into how you operate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it was like from reading it, it was like as I was making those notes, I was linking this to myself. Hey, I could do this with my email and that kind of thing. So by the time I actually went to implement it, I had already implemented some of the things already. So yeah, there probably were some benefits to doing that. Gettingthingsdone.com is that is a website, probably has a lot of those resources as well that Dylan mentioned. I thought, and again, obviously people can check out the book or any of those other places Dylan mentioned to get an idea about or to go into more detail. I thought maybe we could give people a few, well, I know we've done that already, but a few more sort of things we've got out of the book. And one of the things for me that's been really useful and kind of relates to something I've covered on the show before on the previous discussion was this idea of I used to have a physical diary and I used to write everything for that week, but I'd also have my to-dos in there as well. So it wasn't necessarily like this is something on that date. It was something clean vacuum filters or something like that, on that particular day. And then I wouldn't do it that week and I'd cross it out and then I'd write it over the next week. And that was really demoralizing. So I was like, I won't do that. And I also ended up with a diary that was just totally full. Like there was no white at all on the page. It was just text everywhere, just totally full. And then I'd do the same again the next week and so on. And it was not good. And so I switched over to a Google Calendar. So it's like all you can see is what you have to do that day. And that was a lot more manageable. But even that wasn't great because I'd end up not doing the things and then the reminders would carry over to the next day. So one thing which I really got out of the book, which has been really important for me, is only having the calendar for time specific actions. So I still do use the calendar for non-time specific actions if it's something I have to do like every so often, even if it's not that important, because you can easily set it, go off every 6 months, every year or whatever. But if I don't do it that day, I then just transfer it to my getting things done list rather than, again, it's kind of carrying over the next day. And it kind of weighing on you, kind of demoralizing that you haven't got everything done that day. So that was a really useful thing for me of having things. And also I've got my physical lists. These are non-computer things, and I've got a physical list on the computer as well. Next actions. So some of the things I've got on there, like a clean bathroom mirrors and clean dishwasher, not that important, but it's much better sitting on my list than me going, okay, I don't have to do that, versus like something that's coming up and every day sitting in my inbox. Also, the quick and easy actions is another useful thing as well. I've got that I can do that quickly and just kind of check that off. So yeah, definitely the calendar, again, only time specific actions has been really useful for me. Any other specific tips from the book you'd like that have been useful for you?
The one that comes to mind is, so in the book, David Allen talks about making a distinction between projects and next actions. So if you start from the point of when you often look at a to-do list, it'll have things that are very ambiguous, right? It might have something like garage or mom, or send email to Jen, and there's kind of an ambiguity around what do these things mean. So he recommends sorting these things into either next actions or projects. A next action is essentially when there's a very clear one step that you need to do. A project is when there's actually an outcome that you need to achieve that takes more than one step. So take, for example, the to-do list item, mom. That might mean I've bought a gift for mom's birthday, right? So that would then be listed as a project in your projects list, in your Getting Things Done system. And you'd have a list of all of these outcomes that you're working towards. Now, something that I did early on in my GTD system was that I had my projects, and then I'd have the actions for that project listed as a kind of like a subtask in the software that I was using. And what that meant was that I had to then, every time I needed to decide what I wanted to do, in order to see what are the next actions I can do right now, I would have to look through my whole projects list, and that made things quite clunky. And so then I kind of went back to the book, I reread a couple of sections, and I realized, I need to have my next actions separate from my projects. And so now I have a projects list separately, but I have next actions lists that sit in a completely different space, that essentially give me a very clear picture of what are the things that I can do right now in order to move things forward. And having those next actions, so you might have next actions for multiple projects in a separate place, in their own separate list, and that has allowed a whole lot more fluidity in my life. That just, it just brings a level of clarity that I was shocked how much it did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I do have that separate on that physical list, which I do see. But yeah, projects list is separate to the next action, even though you might have specific next actions for those things as well. And to give an example of that, and he was saying that doing them into next actions rather than having very ambiguous things, which might be many actions, it kind of makes it seem more manageable. So one example is we've recently got a car, and so I had to get it serviced. I haven't had a car for many years. And so it was like, it was actually more of a project, right? It sounds silly, but it is a project rather than action. Get car service. And obviously now I've got a regular place I go. It probably is more of an action, but at the time, so it was kind of sitting on my sort of to-do list for a long time, like get car service, but it was kind of too many steps involved and I kept putting it off. And then again, thinking about the book, I broke it down of research place to get the car serviced, and then did that, and then found a place pretty quickly. And then, that project was completed fairly quickly. But again, breaking these things down into action. So I guess that is sort of one difference from, I guess, more to-do lists. Like typical to-do lists would generally sort of combine projects and actions, as you touched on. So I think that's been a useful thing for me as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a big principle that I've taken out of getting things done is breaking things down into manageable chunks. And I've actually implemented a little hack, which comes from holacracy practice. So let's say I have a project right now on my plate of I'm planning a holiday with several family members. I'm going to be meeting them in Prague in a couple of months, and so I have a project of planned Prague holiday. But there's a few different elements to that, right? So I have that project, and then I actually break it down into multiple sub projects. And that allows me to very clearly deal with what are the outcomes in that that I need to figure out. So, for example, one sub project is bought shoes. So getting things done gets you to. I'll have a little diversion and come back to it. Getting things done gets you to put things in the past tense as if it's already done, so that it brings a level of focus. It's kind of like, okay, what do I need to do to reach this state of I've bought these shoes? So I need some new shoes before I go to Prague. So that's a sub project in my system. Another thing is I need to have booked the transport. So booked transport to and from Prague is another project, and so on and so forth. And I found this incredible satisfaction of ticking off these outcomes. It not only it comes with this combined wonderfulness of both moving things forward at a satisfying pace, but then also really reinforcing that feeling of I'm moving things forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's another thing I liked about the book of, again, even though it was perhaps originally their sort of 2000 or so version, early 2000s, was kind of pitched around, again, sort of, it was seemed to be more focused on corporate executives or whatever. For me, a lot of this stuff has not been stuff around work. I've always felt pretty on top of stuff around work, I guess, because I felt like I had to be in paid work. So it was actually pretty much all stuff that was unrelated to paid work. And I feel like this book puts everything on a level hierarchy in terms of anything that's weighing on your mind. It doesn't matter if it's leisure or planning a holiday, paid work, family, whatever, like anything that's weighing on your mind of kind of getting getting to the bottom of those things as well. I think another thing, which again, obviously everyone has done to-do lists. So it's like, yeah, this book sort of goes a bit beyond that. So it is about sort of having those lists, but that weekly review is really important. So in the past, rather than having an in tray, I'd have, maybe like a box or something to have things more manageable, and stuff would just get stuck in there and I just forget about it and that kind of thing. So having that weekly review of checking in, like he recommends Friday afternoon if you're sort of doing more traditional Monday to Friday work, because that way you can both, people are still around if you need to follow up with something, before the end of the workday, but it also means you can go to the weekend and you've kind of feel like you're not necessarily have got everything done, but you've got everything that needs to be done is done. You're kind of on top of things in that way. And yeah, I've sort of done that with two separate weekly check-ins. I'm working full time now. So I do my like personal check-in, non-work related on Thursday night, and then my work one Friday afternoon. But whatever works for you, it's just a matter of like something doesn't be a next action and then you just forget about it for months and the time passes, those kind of things. So having that weekly check-in just makes you feel, even if you don't do anything at all from your list, it just feels like, yeah, there's stuff on there. I'll do it at some point. And that's okay. But just kind of, even if you don't do anything, of just feeling more on top of things, I guess.
The key thing is not just having a system, but a system that you trust, and those regular check-ins build that trust over time. So yeah, that's super important. I'm really glad you named that. And you talked about you just dropped the phrase having things on your mind, and I wanted to sort of get at the beauty, I think, of the kind of space that having trust in your system can create. I think I've recently been engaging in Vipassana meditation, and something that I've found immensely interesting about that is that my most creative ideas seem to bubble up in times when I'm intensely meditating, and when I take the space to when I take the space to away from all of the hustle and bustle of the everyday. I think the beauty of GTD is that it's another tool that allows you to create that space, not on the meditation mat, but in the ebbs and flows of everyday life. And yeah, it's just so it's such an interesting way to kind of unleash the kind of, if you have a vision for what kind of life that you want to create, what kind of world do you want to create, having a trusted system can allow that to really kind of come out of you, so to speak. Which might be a little bit of a strange image, but that's been my experience anyway, and I wanted to drop that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel that, like, I've never practiced meditation myself, but I guess when I am in that more mindful state of mind, and even when I haven't been on top of things, I guess like taking my dog through a walk through the bush or something like that, those 45 minutes, there's nothing else I'm going to do. I'm not going to deal with any emails. I won't do anything like that. And often we'll get these ideas for a podcast episode, for a lecture, whatever it may be, when I'm in that state. And I guess getting things done is kind of like, allowing you to do that state of mind more often, where you're not sort of so much think about all the things you should be doing or could be doing. I guess I also want to touch on the idea of, why we feel bad about having too many things on our plate. And part of the reason is breaking agreements, either with ourselves or with others. And that's definitely been my experience. Like, the negative thing of having 1,000 emails isn't necessarily just having 1,000 emails, but the fact that I've occasionally missed things from people, and I feel bad about that. Even if they don't care that much, I still feel bad about that. So yeah, it's about sort of having less of that sort of negative feelings of like, am I missing things? And I guess that stress-free productivity, like the stress-free being sort of an overlooked part of the book, I think, in a lot of the discussions around it, or the more sort of popular culture discussions around it as well. And so to avoid those sort of negative feelings, it's about, sometimes doing less. So like, he said, if you don't want to lower your standards, make less agreements. And I think that's something I need to focus on, of wanting to do things to a higher level. But that means I got to do less things, and sort of having everything in the one place of these are all the things I'm doing might make me more sort of cautious about taking on more things as well. I think maybe one more, if I just give one more thing from the book, and this is a really useful one. And he did say, if this is all you take away, it'll probably be quite useful. But if something takes less than 2 minutes, do it right away. And that's been really useful for me, as well as someone who would generally not do that and then build up with like 100 or hundreds of things that would have taken less than 2 minutes end up being hours and hours of work. And I don't think the 2 minutes is that important. I think it could be 1 minute or it could be 3 minutes, but it's more about, if it doesn't take long, do it right away. And often I do things of like reading a pamphlet or something like that, and then just put it on my desk, and then all these things build up, or an email, whatever it may be. And I think this also goes back to the importance of, as Dylan pointed out, maybe taking a day, maybe taking a couple of days, whatever it takes to try and get on top of things, your inbox, that kind of thing, sort of resetting things. Because now I find it so much easier to do that. Well, I've got 3 emails, will probably take about 30 seconds each. I could easily clear that, versus I've got 1,000 emails that take 30 seconds each, and it just feels overwhelming as well. So again, if it doesn't take long, do it right away. And also of kind of resetting things back to zero, at least occasionally anyway, so you can kind of implement those practices.
Yeah, and for people who are thinking about implementing their own GTD system, I think a really important message to take away that David Allen puts out there is that this thing is like a martial art. In my experience, it's something that you can get immense benefit from in the short term, but mastering it takes a really long time. And I'm far from perfect. I have an inbox that's currently got about 30 emails in there. And I haven't made the time to get on top of it yet. But, I know that I will, and I know that I'm just going to kind of improve my practice over time. The other thing is that it's okay to kind of change up your system over time as well. So I've been through, I initially had a system on a software called Todoist, and then I moved to paper. And now I've moved to another system called Glassfrog. And that's all about, that's a pretty normal thing to do in GTD practice. And basically, coming back to this principle of a great system is a system that works for you. You will refine your system over time and find that you will apply the GTD principles, and you'll find ways that kind of work for your own style, that work for your own kind of lifestyle, the time commitments that you have. So kind of I'd really advise people to hold it lightly and enjoy the journey of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we did already mention the email folders of like 1 next action, 2 waiting for. And I've found that really useful, even though I'm kind of tricking myself into having an empty inbox. I've found it really useful if I do have an email that does take longer than 2 minutes to respond to, and it's not urgent that I have to reply to it, I will put it into my next action folders. So I've got that empty inbox, and I just find that really useful if I'm going to be writing or something like that, of like having that perception. So it is kind of tricking myself in a way, but having that sort of empty inbox as really useful. I was also listening to another discussion. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this author, but Oliver Burkeman. I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah, so I've recently heard an interview with him on Factually with Adam Conover, the episode with Death to Productivity with Oliver Burkeman. And he was saying at the same time, we shouldn't be obsessed with this idea of like clearing the decks and having a zero inbox or whatever, because we'll kind of never reach the end of it. So it's a matter of, if there is something important, maybe you should do it first. So if you want to spend more time on reading, for example, maybe you should just read first thing in the morning, even though you don't have an empty inbox as well, which I relate to as well. And I don't think that's, as we've touched on, is really inconsistent with getting things done. But yeah, that was kind of interesting as well. Again, I found it really useful to have that zero inbox, but I guess not being too obsessed with it as well.
No, absolutely not, because we're all getting stuff thrown at us all the time. If we had to have a clear deck before we did anything, we'd be constantly spending time clearing our decks, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's important to have like regular check-ins, but to not be spending time always processing input.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to finish up just by giving some critiques of getting things done, which I think we've kind of touched on already, or just this productivity movement in general. One of the points from the book was he was saying, like, you always ask for the next action, and that avoids a victim mentality. And the next time someone moans about something, ask what the next action is. And I guess my critique of that was, well, maybe some people are victims of overwork from institutions. And this kind of puts a lot of the blame or responsibility on individuals more than the institution. But I also think getting things done is kind of a fairly neutral thing politically, because your next action doesn't necessarily mean putting up with it. Your next action could be quitting the job. Your next action could be getting involved with your union and challenging those kind of things as well. So I kind of do see that critique. I also think not every book or thing has to do everything. So I guess getting things done doesn't deal with that sort of institutional overwork. But I feel like those of us on the left particularly often go like, this thing is problematic for this reason, and therefore like it has nothing to offer. And I'm like, well, this book is limited in that, like, it doesn't solve everything. But we still do have to deal with this stuff as individuals, and it is really useful in that front. So I think there are other obviously books, other things. Bullshit Jobs is one we've discussed in the show a lot, looking at that issue of like unnecessary work and those kind of things. That's obviously looking more at the structural level rather than individual. So other books can do other things. It doesn't have to do everything. So I sort of had that critique, but it doesn't mean it isn't useful. Any thoughts on that critique?
Yeah, I'd say, getting things done. I think I'd agree with you that getting things done is politically neutral. Fundamentally, what it's about is it is very individual focused, and it is very much about getting clear on what is important to you, and then what do you need to do in that. I think one of the things it has to offer in terms of people seeking to create systemic change, creating institutional change, is it helps you to just, it's almost you could put a spiritual lens on it, and it helps you to accept what the reality is that's in front of you. What is the world right now? And as I see the world, then what are the outcomes that I want to achieve in that world in order to change it or in order to flourish within it? And then, given the landscape in which I'm in, what can I do? I think in terms of like, I don't know if David Allen ever speaks about systemic problems, but I doubt that he would ever take the position that, well, I don't know David Allen, but I haven't seen the methodology kind of talk about whether systems don't need to change or not. And I think they absolutely do. And I think, but ultimately it's individuals that need to act to change those systems. So it can be a very empowering tool to kind of show you the way of how to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It kind of reminds me a little bit of mindfulness meditation, which again, I haven't ever done, but my partner Katie is very much into it. And I can see how it's really benefited her. And like that can be used in kind of a shitty way, like in workplaces of like, we'll give you an impossible workload and you'll kind of manage to cope with it a bit by doing some mindfulness, like kind of corporate mindfulness. But that doesn't necessarily mean mindfulness is bullshit. It's just used in that particular way. And I think the same with getting things done. It could be used in that way of, of like, well, let's ignore the sort of institutional overwork and the problems in the workplace and just you deal with it as an individual. Or it can just be used as a useful tool just to stay more on top of our inbox and just to stay more on top of the things we have to do, which aren't to do with bullshit jobs or overwork, which might be just little things like, as I say, framing a painting we want to get framed, or these little things that come up in life, regardless of corporations or whatever as well. Yeah. And I think the book also, it it sort of it starts off small, and the idea, as Dylan's touched on, it can kind of get us onto bigger kind of thinking, whereas a lot of stuff often goes the other way of starting up for the big picture and going back to the small. And I've found that really useful, because I feel like, because I haven't been on top of those little things, it's been less headspace for the bigger questions as well. So I think that's a useful thing as well, of kind of starting small and going big as well.
Yeah, and I think the idea of the things that you're kind of dealing with in your everyday point to what your larger values and purpose are is a really interesting kind of orientation. I found GTD has it. It's hard to kind of put it into words, but it just makes life a little bit easier to grapple with.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely found that. So I appreciate the recommendation. I appreciate you coming on the show today. We'll put up links to a bunch of those things, gettingthingsdone.com. We'll put a link up to the Factually episode I mentioned with Adam Conover. Also, kind of similar to my critiques, there was an interesting article in the New Yorker, The Rise and Fall of Getting Things Done, which was kind of a critique of sort of productivity culture, which again, I don't see it as, I sort of accept those critiques, but it's sort of about that structural critique, which I mentioned, and also like being productive for the sake of it. But I think, as we've touched on, if we can get more on top of those little things, there is the bigger picture we can go to as well. So I don't see them as inherent, but I did think it was useful. Another podcast I recently heard, Pink Spots, PYNK Spots, was how I'm attempting to not feel like shit about myself in 2023. Also dealt with a lot of these issues as well. I think, again, the issues that a lot of people are going through too. So that was my final thoughts. We'll put links up to all of those at progressivepodcastaustralia.com, also in the YouTube description as well. Any final thoughts you want to finish up with, Dylan, or?
I would say take it step by step. Enjoy the journey of getting things done, if that's one that you want to embark on. And be gentle with yourself. It is very much a journey. And I'd really, really encourage people to think about it that way.